Hey DreamChasers, it's Jacey, and today I want to test out some mixed media paper. I have a project that I'm working on that involves a bunch of different mediums, from CARBOTHELLO pencils, which is like a pastel pencil, to inks, COPIC markers, watercolor, and I need a paper that can handle all of those different mediums because some of them will be on the same page. It's for an 8-page comic that I'm working on with a character who is in a bunch of different settings, and each setting is going to be drawn in different mediums. And I need a paper that can handle all of them because some of the different mediums are going to be on the same page. So I'm going to try out some paper today and see which one I like the best. So we're going to start off with one of the cheaper options that I found, which is this Canson mixed media paper. This is like, I don't know, maybe $8 at Walmart, and as you can see, it comes with a lot of paper. There's 60 sheets in here, and according to the cover, it's good for pen and pencil, acrylic, watercolor, so this should be able to handle anything that we put on it, but I'm not sure because these pages seem kind of thin. We will try it out though. And just in case that doesn't work out, I have this Strathmore mixed media paper, which is only a few bucks more, but as you can see, it comes with a lot less sheets. So there's only 15 sheets in this pad. It's a little bit thicker than the Canson, and it's also has less of a tooth, which I'm a little concerned about, but we'll see how it does. But this is supposedly also for wet or dry medium, and for finished work. So this is another option. We're going to try this out as well. And because I'm a little bit skeptical about mixed media paper handling wet mediums that well, like watercolor and ink, I also want to try out just some watercolor paper, because this is designed specifically for watercolor. I just wanted to see if this can also handle stuff like Copic markers and pastel pencils, just in case the other two papers can't handle the wet media. So we're going to try out all three today. This is, by the way, cold pressed watercolor paper. I know so little about paper that I don't know what that means, but we're gonna try this as well. So, all right, so let's get started. Hey, so I had recorded some audio while I was drawing all of this that I thought I was going to get to use for the video, but I accidentally recorded it through my webcam and not my mic, and it sounded like garbage. Which is fine, because honestly it wasn't that interesting anyway. I was just kind of commenting on some things as I sort of discovered them. I'm going to try to remember sort of what they were to give you the highlights. But basically I started off with this Canson mixed media paper. This is the paper that had the most texture and tooth to it, but it was kind of thin. It wasn't as thick as the Strathmore, and it's a little bit of a cheaper option. So honestly, I started with this because I didn't have the highest hopes for it, but you know, I just wanted to kind of see how it did because it is affordable. You get a ton of paper for the price, so you know, hopefully that would be a great option if it worked out well. And so I started with these CARBOTHELLOs, which if you've never used them, I love these things. They're so cool. They're these soft, like pastel pencils, which make them really easy to blend. I find them a lot easier to blend than colored pencils. And so I was just kind of starting off with those and seeing, you know, how I liked it. There was a lot of texture coming through on the paper, so I tried to take a smudge stick and kind of blend a little bit more. And then I realized that I do want to ink this, so I went back and tried to ink it, which didn't actually work that well because of the, you know, the thickness of the pastel. So you see on the right there, I went back and I inked first and then colored just to see the difference, and it was much easier to do that. So that was something that I realized I'll have to do for the final piece. And here I'm trying out Copic markers. So normally I've only ever used Copic markers on like marker paper, and you know, which is designed specifically for them, and they blend really well on that. They don't bleed, and I felt like in comparison to that, on this paper the Copic markers were kind of bleeding a little bit. So you know, when I put the color down, it would pool a little bit more than I want it to, especially the darker colors, and that made me feel like I didn't necessarily have a lot of control. So I'm not exactly crazy about how they work on this paper. I think they were okay. I definitely think it's usable, but you know, it just, blending was a little bit awkward. My sense of control wasn't quite there. It's not ideal. And here I was just kind of checking to see, you know, did the Copics, because they're, you know, they're not like a wet medium like water, but I just wanted to see if they, you know, caused any warping. And not too bad. And you know, there's a little bleeding through the other side of the paper, but I think that's fine. And here I'm moving on to ink. So I just used a brush pen to, you know, ink my line work really quick. You can tell I'm kind of getting sloppier about the precision of the drawing at this point, because that wasn't really the point. of this experiment, and I'm just taking some India ink here and dipping it in water. I saw this method on YouTube. I've never done this before, so I was looking up like, how do you do that? Are you allowed to mix ink and water? Is it gonna work? And it's fine. The ink that I was using though is really old. It's from like college, so it's kind of gritty. You can kind of see like weird grainy texture in it. And I think for this project I need to buy some new ink that isn't like that, or mix it up better, I'm not sure. But, you know, you can see that the paper took the ink okay. I was nervous to get too dark and get too saturated with it. And same thing here, so I'm doing the watercolor right now, and not right now, this is like a voiceover, you know what I mean. But I was nervous to get a lot of water down on this paper because it is very thin. I did use tape because I figured it would kind of minimize warping and, you know, let me have those kind of clean edges that I'd want. And I'm just kind of going slow and building layers because I was nervous to get too much saturation on the paper, which I think is kind of more relevant when you get to the background, because I'm doing this sort of galaxy pattern background, and the technique that I've sort of come up with, I guess, or learned, I don't know, it was a little bit of watching people, a little bit of trial and error, but I saturate the area, you know, with a ton of water, and then I kind of drop the pigment in, and then it sort of spreads and pools around, and that's how you get that kind of neat galaxy effect. And I really like that technique, but the problem with it is it requires a lot of water, which warps the paper. And so I was trying it out again. I wanted to see what would happen if I used a little bit less water and kind of was more precise about dabbing the paint, and that worked out, I think, pretty well. And here I'm just kind of comparing. So I'm moving on to the Strathmore paper, and I'm just sort of commenting on the fact that, you know, the Strathmore paper is a little bit thicker, but it's smoother. You can see it's actually a lot thicker. You can't really tell in video, but it is thicker. The Canson paper kind of bends more. It just has a little more give. So I think the Strathmore paper is heavier, but it does have a smoother texture to it, which I was kind of concerned that maybe it wouldn't take certain mediums that well. So going in, I kind of had that hesitation. So starting with CARBOTHELLOs again, I just kind of went in and, you know, built those up. I kind of start with like the lighter color and sort of build up over time, and so you'll see me sort of build this skin tone pigment out and blend. And I felt immediately a huge difference from the Canson paper to the Strathmore paper. Because the Strathmore paper is smoother, I felt like the texture of the paper wasn't coming through as much. The artwork looked a lot more blended, and I felt like it wasn't as distracting. You weren't seeing like that tooth, and it was kind of easier to just blend the colors. Overall, I really feel like the Strathmore paper is perfect for something like CARBOTHELLOs. I like using these pencils a lot, but sometimes depending on the paper, you do get a lot of that texture coming through, and I think it looks great on this without a lot of effort, you know, because you can always kind of keep adding layers and keep blending and kind of build up and you know, not necessarily see all of that texture from the paper, but I really didn't feel like it took me that long to do it on this paper, which was nice because, you know, projects have deadlines and things take time. So I was really happy with the results of that. And I noticed that, you know, there's some dust from the CARBOTHELLOs. They're kind of dusty, but it erased just fine, and I think it works out. I did a little bit of blending since I did it, you know, for the original, but I really didn't feel like it needed a lot, which is nice. I didn't have to spend a lot of time on that. And then moving on to the COPIC markers. So I think this paper took the COPIC markers really well. It didn't bleed as much as the other paper. I felt like I had a lot more control, and blending was just a lot easier. Now granted, I'm doing something that's a little bit more in my comfort zone because a lot of the stuff that I've done with Copics has been blending like hair and skin. So, you know, this was definitely just a very natural kind of thing for me to work on. But it just felt good. It felt good on this paper. I felt in control. I felt like the colors, you know, looked right. Things were... they weren't bleeding, and they were blending in a way that, you know, it felt good. I wasn't scared to keep layering more marker on top, that it would, you know, that it would like pool and bleed outside of my lines or anything. Like I felt really in control, which was nice. And then to kind of test that, I went back with a darker color because I realized the darker colors were the ones that bled, and still, even going in darker, it was fine. So I think Copics on this paper look great. And then moving on to inks. So again, I real quick just I kind of outlined my character with a brush pen, and I wasn't afraid to get a little messy with that. It's funny because this was for an example, but I think part of I like the look. I actually like that I got a little messy and things weren't perfect, and I think that I'm hoping that quality comes through in the finished comic. Because I think my sketches for this actually look pretty good. And then, so coming in with the ink, I just wanted to kind of see how dark I could get and how much liquid I could get on this paper, because, there was going to be some warping. And not only how dark, but how light, too. Because, so the parts where I have kind of the lighter color there, it's more water, right? Mixing it with more water. And I just wanted to see how the paper would take with a lot of ink and a lot of water on it. Would it warp? And I think it actually did pretty well without a lot of warping. Moving on to watercolor, same thing. So I was a little careful. I went very slow. I didn't put down a ton of water at first. And I kind of just started light because I didn't want to, warp the paper on purpose, I guess. And I just kind of came in with my character. And for watercolor, I found that I do prefer to ink after the fact because it's a lot easier to not worry about having to, have your lines, if they get wet, like they're not going to bleed and get messed up. The multi-liners I use are pretty water resistant, waterproof, but still, I just think it's just a little bit safer to do that at the end. So here is where I think I was really putting the paper to the test because I'm putting down all that water to get that kind of background effect. And I wanted to be careful and not purposely, just drown the paper, but I wanted to make sure it was something that, I could achieve the look I wanted to. So I kept, kind of adding in more water and more paint to just sort of see how the paper would do. And I let it dry, and it did pretty well. If you see, it really didn't warp that much at all, especially compared to the Canson paper. There's minimal warping. Like it definitely, you can kind of feel some bubbles. I'm testing it there to kind of see that, yeah, it warped a tiny bit, but like you can really see the difference. Like that page warped a lot. As where the Strathmore did great. I think overall it just took all of the medium really well. Everything looks good, and the paper's in good shape. But I was nervous that wasn't going to be enough, like I mentioned earlier in the video. So I wanted to try out watercolor paper as well, because I knew confidently, right, the watercolor is going to take the ink, it's going to take the watercolor, it's not going to warp. So I was just kind of curious how stuff like CARBOTHELLOs and COPIC markers do on watercolor paper. In case, anybody else, if that's what you happen to have and you want to do a project like this, could you do it? And I got kind of tired of, finished little drawings, so I was like, I'm just gonna fill in some hearts with some color, which, in retrospect, I didn't quite get the same effect, right, with blending and everything that I got with the other pieces, but I kind of got enough information from that. So I think the CARBOTHELLOs look fine. There's a little bit of tooth showing through the paper, and they blended okay. I think it looks alright. Copic markers, I realized, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna make, a rainbow flag and a trans flag, but as soon as I started doing that, I was like, wait, there's no blending. So I kind of gave it a little bit of a shadow with some gray, and it looks alright. I realized I needed to really blend, so that's why I did that little bar on the side. And I think it blended fine. It bled a little bit. I didn't have quite as much control as the Strathmore paper, but I think it's fine. And then here, even though I knew for a fact it was going to be fine, I just wanted to test some ink and just kind of go real heavy with the ink and the water and just, see how far I can push that paper because it is watercolor paper. And same thing with the watercolors. I really put down a lot of water. You can see I kind of overdid it. Everything's just kind of leaking all over the place because I wanted to demonstrate the difference, for how much water you can really put on this paper. I put a little too much, so I dabbed it off. Alright, so let's go over the results. So first we have this Canson mixed media paper, and you can see there's a bit of a tooth, so it kind of comes through with these pastel pencils. You can see the texture, which I don't think looks bad. I think that's kind of an interesting look. For the Copics, I think those bled a bit. You can kind of see where some of the colors kind of faded in the darker sections, and I feel like I didn't have quite the control that I'd want to have that you'd have with like marker paper. Inks, I was a little nervous to really get dark and heavy with the ink, which I'm not sure is going to work for this because I really want that water background to be kind of black, to really get a sense of like it's dark underwater. And I think the watercolors, it handled it fine. The watercolors themselves look okay. The paper obviously though is very warped, right? So we have like, you can just kind of get a sense that like this paper really changed shape, which I think is okay. I mean, I think this would scan okay, or if I put some books on it, it would flatten out, but this definitely is a little bit thinner than maybe I would want. Moving on to the Strathmore paper. So this paper is thicker, and you can see right away too, the warping is minimal in comparison. There's a little bit of warping, but it's not too bad. I think it took the CARBOTHELLOs just fine. There's less of a tooth to the paper, so you don't actually get as much of that texture, you know, as you do. I'll hold them up kind of side by side here. You can really see the texture on the Canson paper, and you don't really get that here. And then, you know, for the COPIC markers, I think that worked out pretty well in terms of there's not a lot of bleeding. I think it blended pretty nice. I felt like I was in control, as we're, again, you know, compared to the Canson paper, there was a lot more bleeding. I feel like it just didn't quite work as well. The inks, I was not as afraid to get really dark, so you can see there's a lot more like dark blacks on here. I probably honestly would go over this again though, now that it's dry, maybe get it a little bit darker. And then the watercolor, I think it took it very well. There's not really too much warping, a little bit, you know, and I think the color kind of blended nicely. I think it worked. So this paper, I think is the paper that I would go with, just because I think it handled everything really well. And then as for the watercolor paper, I actually think this kind of handled everything okay too. Obviously the watercolor paper handled watercolor very well and ink very well, because that's what it was made for. So, you know, there's very minimal warping there. I put down plenty of water and it felt fine. But these two mediums were my concern. So the CARBOTHELLOs here, there is some tooth to that paper, so you get more texture than you do with the Strathmore paper. But honestly, I actually think that the Canson mixed media paper texture, still, you see more texture and more tooth to that paper than you do in the watercolor paper. Surprised me. The Copic markers, you know, I think they blended okay. Getting a little bit of bleeding, not too bad. I think that it's fine. I do think that it kind of worked out better though on the Strathmore paper. I don't know. It's not really a one-on-one comparison because I was getting kind of bored with drawing like finished stuff. But I think the Strathmore paper overall, it's better for all the mediums. The watercolor was fine. I have to be careful. I don't want to like, you know, soak through this, as where I felt a little bit more comfortable putting a little bit more water down here. But I think the trade-off is worth it of having the CARBOTHELLOs look really good and the COPICs look really good. So I'm really glad that I did this little experiment, and I know for sure that the paper I'm going to use is going to work for all these mediums. I think everything turned out pretty nice, and you can really get a sense that, you know, this is what the final product of my comic is going to look like. It kind of worked out that this is actually the character from the comic. So I have a really clear picture in my head of how this is going to look, and I'm excited. So if you have a project that's going to be using this many mediums and you need a paper that can handle it all, definitely recommend the Strathmore mixed media paper. Don't overdo it on saturating it with water and, you know, go too nuts with that. Be a little careful, but you know, it's good for all these mediums. It's a good versatile paper. It's a little bit expensive considering how much it is per sheet compared to something like the Canson. So, you know, depending on what you're doing, if it's kind of more for practice, you could use something like the Canson, and for, you know, your finished piece, use this. Hopefully that was helpful to you guys, and if you have any mixed media projects that you're working on or paper that you prefer, let me know in the comments, and let me know your recommendations. Alright, thanks so much for watching. Until next time, chase your dreams. Peace! Hey, you made it to the end of the video! As your reward for making it this far, you get to look at my cute dog, Riley. And if you subscribe to this channel, not only do you get more videos like this one, but you get more Riley! It's a really good deal. It's free. Just hit that sub button. Look how cute she is. You can't turn her down.